Well, good morning. I'm not going to say anything at this stage. All I'm going to do is welcome our principal, Professor Anton Muscatelli, who will open the 7th Annual Learning and Teaching Conference of the University of Glasgow. Anton.
Well, thanks very much, Frank, and colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It's my very great pleasure to welcome you to this 7th Annual University of Glasgow Learning and Teaching Conference. I'm delighted to be able to be here and just say a few words of introduction to get the proceedings underway. I think thanks to your support over the years, this conference has established itself as one of the major events in the university's calendar, and I think it says something about the university's, the importance that the university places, the significance that we place as a university on learning and teaching. And again, it's great to see so many people in this room. I understand that we have around 250 delegates in this conference, which is again a fantastic response, and I think a ringing endorsement and clear indicator of the health of learning and teaching at the university. And I think it's something to celebrate and be proud of, because our university has long prided itself in its concern for and the promotion of quality teaching. And once again, we've put a marker down. It is something which absolutely matters to the university. It's tremendous to see just how much interest there is in a conference such as this and what is our core activity, which is teaching. So thank you all for coming. Thank you for your expression of interest, and thank you for putting learning and teaching so high on the agenda. And the conference happens at a very good time. We've just received an early draft of the outcome report submitted by the Quality Assurance Agency on our enhancement-led institutional review. The overarching judgment for the university is that we have effective arrangements for managing academic standards, and that's a rather modest terminology which the QAA uses, but it is the highest possible rating the most positive judgment that can be reached on a university. And that's the third year in a row in which we've achieved that top assessment, which is great. But as I said, the overall assessment perhaps matters less than what's in the report, which highlights a number of areas of positive practice here at the University of Glasgow. And it's great to see that it includes the use of data to support student progress. The QAA also highlights how we're embedding graduate attributes in the curriculum, how we support our international students, and again, that's great to see given just how much we've grown our international numbers over the last few years. They praise our strategic approach to widening access and delivery of strategic objectives in relation to learning, teaching, and internationalization through the international deans and the deans of learning and teaching. And again, something we should be proud of, because a lot of these structures were only embedded really 3 or 4 years ago with our university restructuring. And in addition to these, the QAA also highlights others that clearly pinpoint why our progress to delivering quality learning and teaching is working so effectively. The report highlights a culture of self-evaluation and the consistent ability to share and disseminate good practice, which again is very welcome indeed. It notes our emphasis on student engagement and the evolution of the postgraduate certificate in academic practice and our ongoing commitment to developing our teachers. And further, it identifies the fact that students are very positive about their learning experience because of the international and diverse nature of the campus and the university's commitment to research-led teaching. And it's also due, no doubt, because of the very close collaborative relationship that we have with the student body. It's again great to see the Student Representative Council represented so well at a conference such as this. I think what's striking is the sense in which so many of these attributes inform this conference as well. Self-evaluation, dissemination of good practice, student engagement, and the forms that this might take in the learning environment. Critically, I think this conference takes on board the fact that good though we may be, however effective we are judged to be, the world just doesn't stand still enough to applaud us. The title of this conference, which is played out across its themes, puts it very succinctly. It's about challenging conventions. I think most of us in this room are only too aware of the many challenges that we face and the need to think well and creatively to stay ahead of the game. There are funding challenges that are likely to be with us in public funding for many years to come still. There's global competition, universities across the world developing very fast. There are constitutional uncertainties, of course. And these are all, I think all of these have something to say about what we do, and they all pick away at the comfort zones our conventions may provide. But perhaps of all the challenges out there, perhaps the most fundamental challenge I think we face spins around the current and future evolution of our perhaps most cherished teaching models. In the face of social and technological change, we have to understand the need to change with it. It's not a new insight. Our own earlier reflective analysis noted in it that students expect technology to feature in their studies and for lecturers to have confidence in its use. And we acknowledge that whilst IT provision has increased over recent times, student expectation, if anything, has grown at a much quicker pace than our technology has grown. And the danger, of course, is that all of this sounds a bit too heavy on change, on adaptability, on responding to different learning expectations. But we know that we can't be in reactive mode. We want to frame the pressures to change in the rather more positive light of opportunities to challenge conventions, finding new and exciting ways to teach and for students to learn, creating, as our university strategy has it, and I quote, an intellectually stimulating learning environment. And we of course do that with and through our people, through yourselves, our colleagues, and through yourselves, our students. But I think our e-learning strategy gets the relationship between not us and them, but us and IT right. It envisages, and I quote, an academic community that is empowered to creatively consider and take advantage of the opportunities to foster investigative learning afforded by technology. So our focus now at this conference and looking to the future has to be that technology is there to enhance pedagogy rather than to drive pedagogical approaches to suit the technology available. I think it's the proverbial dog that must wag the tail and not the other way around. And this is where the values recognized in our earlier must continue to come to the fore and be allowed to flourish. We want to create an environment that will be a seedbed for creative and innovative thinking, and thinkers indeed, for student and teacher together, partners in a community of scholarship and discovery. And part of that must be the capacity to perpetuate a community of learners that is committed to informing our own practice through engaged inquiry. But nobody should be a lone pioneer left to muddle on and through. Our approach to MOOCs, for example, is surely a model to replicate, where we can see and learn from what's being done in that space, learning from experience of colleagues, and then bringing that insight to bear and to enhance on-campus provision. Quite a few people actually, even this week, have asked me about what we're doing in this particular space. I think we've taken a very reasonable approach to MOOCs. We don't see them as an end in itself. We see them part of shop window, internally and externally, on what the university does. But as I say, it's something which gives us the insight for on-campus provision, as well as developments in online learning. And I think it's what's more exciting even than what we're doing in that particular space of open learning is the launch recently of a 2.34 million initiative to grow our online learning and teaching. The first step here is to build the expertise and experience to deliver online distance learning effectively. And as I said, our current engagement with MOOCs will help to address this, but by itself that won't be enough. We need to create impetus and a step change so we can deliver at the level of others in this space. This is an investment over 5 years which will allow the university to appoint additional academic staff to develop distance learning courses and programs. It will pay for local resources in the colleges and schools to support the online development or enhancement of existing campus-based courses, and will also fund a small central support team to provide schools with expertise in the design and implementation of distance learning. The investment in online courses, I think, will strengthen capability and capacity for both distance learning but also campus-based learning, and that's important. With the potential for full, partial, interactive courses delivery, it has the prospect of really improving the student experience here at home, whilst extending our global reach and strengthening our position in existing and developing markets. It's a really exciting opportunity to develop and enhance our thinking and to provide real potential to enhance the on-campus experience whilst reaching out to a whole new group of learners. And some of this we might do also with partner universities. We're not pioneers in this space, but we're doing things that can be different and exciting. And we are able to also work, I think, with partner universities. So in looking at your program today, with its focus broadly stated on student engagement and the use of technologies in the learning and teaching experience, I think you're clearly going to explore some of the key issues confronting us, which will challenge, I think, and excite the learning and teaching of today, and indeed the learning and teaching of tomorrow. You're bound to, and I hope you will, be challenging conventions, not to unsettle, not to unnerve, not to completely revolutionize what we already do, but I think to reveal new possibilities, new pathways to that sustainable and international, intellectually rich community of scholarship and discovery that we all want to see, and we all want to see the University of Glasgow at the centre of. So I hope you have a very productive conference, and I wish you all the best. Thank you.
Thank you, Anton. I now have something less exciting to do, but nonetheless important, and that's to deal with some housekeeping. So, first of all, fire safety. We're not expecting a fire alarm today, but if the fire alarm does sound, and you'll know it's a continuous electronic sounder, if that happens, and we're in the Butte Hall, please exit via the stairwells at the front and the back of the hall. Go down the staircase and make your way to the assembly point, which is actually at the front flagpole overlooking Kelvin Grove Park. Evacuation information for other venues that we're using today will be made available to you throughout the day. Please also check your programs carefully, because they give you an indication of where the sessions that you've signed up to are taking place and which rooms in the main building they're in. And if you'd like to follow the conference Twitter feed, you'll find a note of the hashtag in the inside of your conference folder. As ever, we want to make this event as stimulating as possible. We want this to be a great conference. And so we always welcome feedback, and there is a conference feedback form, which again, we would welcome you filling in. So, as Anton said in his opening remarks, this is an exciting time for learning and teaching. There are a number of external drivers out there that are beginning to pressurize, if you like, the environment that we work in. Of course, there's been a lot of hype, overhype, really, around MOOCs and what MOOCs are likely to do. But nevertheless, there is an indication there of something happening, some changes occurring in behaviours, and global numbers in terms of learners that are learning online versus on campus, etc., are beginning to shift. We're seeing more online technologies being deployed on campus to give variety to the on-campus experience, and it can be confusing for some. I was talking to a leading MOOC provider yesterday who told me that one of the questions they quite often get when a MOOC is about to start is, which room is it in and at what time is it on? There are, of course, other things happening out there, and some of them are social. So the way that people use technology socially has changed a lot over the last few years. You could argue it's beginning to stabilize in terms of the way people use tablets and use smartphones. But nevertheless, there are some embedded behaviors there that actually we can exploit on campus to improve the learning experience. And we're seeing that, we're monitoring that through our digital native survey that we run every 2 years. Another thing, of course, that's changed dramatically in probably over the last 20 years is the immediacy of information. If you want to know something, you can Google it. That, of course, has its pitfalls, because you then have to question how accurate, how appropriate the information is. And that's something that we as a sector really have fully yet to come to terms with. Here at Glasgow, we have been experimenting in the MOOC space, or we are experimenting in the MOOC space. A real priority there is to understand how we can take some of the learning out of that space and use it to enhance the on-campus learning experience. I was looking at some data yesterday, again from a MOOC provider, which showed that most MOOC users use a desktop machine. But that flips at a certain time of night because the old adage of taking a tablet to bed has changed slightly. It's now an electronic tablet that people take before bedtime. And it's quite clear that there is a growth in the use of tablets for MOOCs, even in the time that MOOCs have existed. So that there are shifts happening out there. I guess the other fundamental shift that's happened, and this is where I completely jinxed this conference, so I apologize for this in advance, and that is that technology has become, day-to-day technology has become more reliable. We're probably at the stage now where some really complex technologies work as well as overhead projectors used to work in the past. So yes, occasionally the bulb doesn't work, but for the vast majority of the time, they're absolutely solid and they work. And that has a big impact on the way that people use them. People won't use technology if they can't rely on it, but when they get to the point of being able to rely on it, it changes attitudes. So yes, we are being challenged externally, but I think my own sense is that the biggest challenge to conventional teaching models will come from ourselves. It will come from the people in this room and our colleagues. We already see across this university and many other universities colleagues that are really pushing the boundaries in terms of what they are doing in the learning space. We are seeing students engaging in that in a way that students haven't engaged before. And I think that's a good thing. I think it's a healthy thing. It's a challenge for us, though, to channel that and to improve the student learning experience here on campus and for our next generation of distance learners as well. Of course, not all change is positive. I mean, for those that can remember back to the days when word processing appeared, first of all, within student essays, for example. I remember my own background is engineering, most of you will know that, but I remember when engineering technical reports started to appear in word processed form. So what you would get is you would get a beautifully handwritten, with diagrams drawn report that was maybe 20 pages long, went into considerable depth in the subject area, and then you would get a 2-page word processed document with a pretty awful diagram embedded in it. But the student who did the word processed document thought that they would get extra marks because it was presented this way. That kind of thing always happens in the early stages when things are adopted. That it happens and we can't get away from that. What we need to do is quickly get over that and start to get to a point where what we do in the classroom is always effective, robust, and always taking forward the learning experience for our students. The program today, in my view, is probably the best yet in all of the learning and teaching conferences that we've had here. And that is no disrespect to any previous presenters, but I think it really is a truly outstanding program today. This is I said this last year, but actually this year has really underlined this. This is a tough conference to get your work accepted in. You know, I've been involved in a lot of conferences, international conferences in a variety of different areas, and I have to tell you that this one is the toughest. I mean, to paraphrase a particular food program that's on a lot nowadays, conferences don't get any tougher than this. Having said that, I don't want to discourage anyone from submitting abstracts in future years, so please keep them coming. It keeps the quality of this conference really high. And I've really been delighted to see the quality of responses. I am very grateful to all of those who submitted proposals, whether they were accepted or not. I'm very grateful also to the technical team led by Vicky Gunn, who provided the oversight. When we close the conference, I'll say more about the organising team. but the technical team did a great job in pulling the program together. And I'm very grateful also to all of those who reviewed abstracts for the conference. I think it's been a great process for us. We also have two terrific keynotes topping and tailing the conference today. I'm really delighted that we've managed to get both of these presenters here. I know both of them by repute, and no pressure to the keynotes, but I'm expecting something quite special today. I think we're going to have a great time. I hope you all really enjoy it. And so now it falls to me to introduce our first keynote speaker. So the first keynote is going to be given by Sian Bayne from the University of Edinburgh. I've seen Sian present a number of times, and every time that she's presented, it has challenged the audience, and I know that you're going to be challenged. Your thinking is going to be challenged today, and as I said before, I think that's a good thing. The University of Edinburgh has really done some quite special things in terms of developing its online provision, some really innovative things. And as we already know, it is a great institution, but I think it's done itself terrific credit by the way that it's engaged in this area. Sian has very much been at the heart of that. She's a senior lecturer in digital education in the School of Education. She convenes the Digital Cultures and Education Research Group and is Associate Dean for Digital Scholarship in the College of Humanities and Social Science. She teaches on the MSc in Digital Education, which is a very large distance program. Some amazing student submissions in that program, which if you haven't seen, if you can see them, it's very much worth seeing. And on e-learning and the e-learning and digital cultures MOOC. She researches digital education, MOOCs, on-campus e-learning and museum learning with current areas of research interest in open education, code cultures, and more than human movements in cultural theory. I'm not going to give you a synopsis of Sian's talk. I'm going to let Sian give her presentation, and that hopefully the fact that I'm not giving you a synopsis will get you listening right from the start. So, Sian.
Many thanks for that generous introduction, and thank you also for inviting me to talk today. I'm just going to do that thing that everyone does at the beginning of any kind of vaguely technology-related conference, which is try and get my slides up. Okay, apologies for this. Okay, so the theme of this event today is convention and the challenging of convention. So I wanted to spend my time talking to you about a convention that I think is still kind of a kind of dominant meme within higher education, which is the notion of campus, and think about challenging of the convention of what we mean by campus in the context of online distance education. What does it mean to be at university when you're never in that university, when you're a distance learner in whatever mode? And what I want to do really in this half hour or so that I've got is to challenge the notion of university space and to think about what university space is becoming in an increasingly digitized, mobile kind of time. And I want to work with an idea of space which isn't so much about the campus or the university as a space in which things happen, but as a space, as something where educational practices converge to kind of make the space. So I want to work with a notion of space which is space as produced by the practices that take place within and around it. So not so much space as a container. And in doing that, I want to draw on some of John Urry's work in particular on mobilities and the notion of an emergent kind of mobilities paradigm, which it's really interesting in the way that it undermines what Uri and Scheller call sedentarist theories, which treat as normal stability in place and treat as abnormal distance, change, and placelessness. So in a way, if this talk does anything, I'd like it to be a kind of critique of sedentarism in the context of the university in the digital age. So this is this is basically what I'd like to do today, because I think the university is in a kind of slightly odd position at the moment in terms of the way in which we think about space. On one sense, we're working with a whole load of new, challenging spatial configurations, if you like. Our students have never been more mobile in terms of their capacity to move across national, international boundaries. Even the students on campus are highly mobile in the sense that, you know, they're as likely to be studying in the coffee shops of Glasgow as they are in the library. Universities are engaging with a whole series of transnational choreographies, you know, branch campuses, degree franchising, other ways of working across national boundaries. And then, above all, we have this kind of these promises of borderlessness, which are offered us by online and distance education. What you can see here is a graphic from the Coursera, the big MOOC provider, Coursera's promotional website, which a student of mine, Jeremy Knox, has been using in his research to demonstrate how the promises of the big MOOC providers are promises of globalization and of borderlessness. So this image shows, you know, the darker patches are the patches where there are more Courserians signed up to courses. The world has literally become visible through the activities of Coursera. The yellow circles are the providers of MOOCs, which, as you can see, they're all located in the global north, so we're delivering to the global south. So we have these new kind of promises of democratization of education through borderlessness online provision. But at the same time, my argument would be that the university and the discourses we use about teaching and learning are still rooted in notions of sedentarism, of place. And these are just a few ways in which I think we see this kind of sedentarism made manifest. The discursive othering of distance education. When we use the term distance education, we're constructing it as something other, as something that doesn't happen on campus. It's the thing that happens elsewhere. Our material teaching practices, our classroom practices. I know we're all talking and thinking about the flipped classroom, but even so, actually, when it comes down to it, most of our teaching practices happen and are located in and around campus space. And even when those teaching practices are taken online, they're often taken online in a way which replicates on-campus teaching method. You know, when you think back to the early days of virtual worlds in education, for example, where we were all frantically rebuilding university campuses in Second Life, even to the MOOC video lecture, which is so dominant now, they're all basic replications of existing on-campus teaching metaphors. And then I think we also have a tendency to fetishize the campus in our promotional materials and in the way in which we think about how we represent and brand the university. Just to give you one quick example, the two images you see up here I really like because they have a kind of compositional, equivalence. But the one on the left, to me, represents something of the kind of morphing of university space that we're working with at the moment, whereas the one on the right, which is at the front cover of the University of Edinburgh's internationalisation strategy, is very much focused on the point, the Old College Dome as the point of campus orientation to the notion of what it means to be a university. And then I think it's okay to, mildly critique your own institutional promotional materials. I wouldn't do it with yours or anything. When you enter the document, you can see that the images that are being used there are very much about the beauty of the city, the monumentality of the campus, the monolithic nature of our campus and the students within it. These are all images taken from the internationalization strategy. So a document that is, in a sense, about the spreading and the kind of problematizing of the boundary of the university in the sense of its international reach, is actually using imagery to kind of reorient the notion of this university to campus space. And I think it's in one sense, it's problematic because I think the way in which we think about the campus, we tend to use the campus as the way of constructing who's inside and who's outside the university. If you're inside the university, you're in the campus. If you're not, you're outside it. So in that sense, there is an ideological kind of dimension to this use of imagery of campus within promotional materials. So what I would quite like to do this morning is just to think differently about how the space of the online university is ordered and constructed and made and enacted. And I want to do that in two different ways. First of all, I'd like to think about university space for distance learners on an accredited master's distance program, which is the one you referred to earlier, the MSc in Digital Education. So I'll draw on some research data around that particular program to explore university space for accredited students. And then I'll end with with looking at some of the spatial imaginaries of learning space that came through on the MOOC in e-learning and digital cultures that we also taught last year. And I want to theorize in a fairly light touch way these different articulations of space by drawing on Moll and Law's articulations of different kinds of social topology, different kinds of social space. So they define four kinds really across a couple of papers. One which is regional space, the bounded space of the university, I suppose the kind of space that we would associate with sedentarist kind of principles. But they identify other kinds of space as well, network space and fluid space and fire space. So these kinds of space, first of all, bounded space, this is where there are regions in which objects are clustered together and boundaries are drawn around each cluster, the campus, the city, the nation state. And then networked space, in which proximity isn't about geographical miles between each other, but it's about how tightly networked and connected we are. I thought you might like this image, which is a social network diagram that someone on our MOOC created of the MOOC Facebook space, which shows our MOOC participants, who are spread across about 120 different countries, and how proximal they were to each other in network space. And then there's fluid space, in which boundaries shift and relations between participants shift and transform and move and become hard to grasp. This image, we're doing a project at the moment with a social media company called History Pin, which if you don't know that site, I'd really recommend you go and have a look. It's where members of the public upload images and then you social network around them. You can place them into Street View and look at kind of changing cityscapes and landscapes in a kind of social way. So this is an image from History Pin, which I was browsing the other day, and I found this photograph of Old College from 1880 with no dome, and I was really shocked. I realised the dome then was only actually put on in 1887, which anyway, that's a kind of architectural fluid space, but you see what I mean. So the first thing that I would like to do is to talk about the enactment of university space among students on a distance learning programme. And the programme I'm talking about is the MSc in Digital Education at Edinburgh. So this is one of Edinburgh's oldest distance programme. It was established and launched in 2006. We have about 180 students on programme at the moment, most of them part-time, academics, researchers, teachers in higher education and school, and other sectors of education, e-learning developers, learning technologists, and people in private and public sector organisations take this programme. So it's a big, kind of vibrant, thriving distance program. So for that reason, and I should say also that our students are very international. I think we have about 40 nations represented on this program. So we thought it would be a perfect place in which to explore this question of what it means to be a student at Edinburgh who's not actually in Edinburgh, and to think, by doing that, about the changing nature of university space. So over a couple of years, or a year and a half or so, we generated interview and visual data with 28 online distance students from the nations that you see here. And this project I conducted with my colleagues, Jen Ross, Hamish MacLeod, Clara O'Shea, James Lamb, who's here in the audience, and Michael Sean Gallagher, as research associates to this project. So what we did was we conducted interviews with people, with students on the programme. We asked them to submit visual records and auditory records of their study spaces, and then we analysed those in terms of the kind of overall research question of the project. What I want to talk to you mostly this morning about is the interview data, because I think it illustrates really nicely some of these issues that I've been raising in theoretical terms. So I think what we really found with these students was that there was a real focus on the notion of the university as a bounded space. There was a surprising kind of sentimental and emotional attachment to the notion of campus among these distance learners. University of Edinburgh Tartan. So the first way in which this was one of the most striking ways in which this kind of focus on bounded space was manifest was in this notion of what we called homing and the sentimental campus. So what you see here is a quote from one of the participants in the research, who's talking about how his family history, he's now based in the States, but he's part of the Scottish diaspora, so he's traced his family record to two waves of migration from Scotland to the US, and now his family is now firmly based in the US, but he saw his decision to attend the University of Edinburgh as a distant student to be a kind of virtual homecoming, and in that sense, the bounded space of Scotland, of Edinburgh, of the university was absolutely key to his identity as a student and his construction of the University of Edinburgh. I think the other way in which we were most struck by this bounded space was through this, what we kind of quite playfully called campus envy, in which the campus became the kind of logos. It was the kind of touchstone. The campus was, for many people, the means by which they achieved it was a touchstone of authenticity of academic experience for some of these students. So, for example, this quote, this student was very happy with his study, very successful in his study, but said, I was actually a little bit jealous of people who were in the city. I thought just because they were in the city, they would have a bit of an advantage in terms of their study. And I found this an intriguing quote as well. This was a highly mobile student who was working between Barcelona and Santa Fe in his professional work, but was studying with us at Edinburgh, and was using the kind of architectural landscape of the University of Edinburgh as this kind of touchstone, a kind of anchor to the experience of being at the university, despite the fact that he wasn't at the university. And this kind of campus orientation, I think, was particularly striking in the way in which people talked about graduation and the importance of campus-based rituals like graduation. What you're seeing here is a screenshot from our virtual graduation ceremony, which we've run now for about 4 years for this program. And it's really good fun. What we do is everyone who wants to graduate but can't come to the campus gathers in Second Life in our university space in that virtual world, and they watch the live graduation ceremony being streamed onto the screen, which is what you can see there. And then the students who are graduating, the Vice-Chancellor in the hall calls out the names of the students who are graduating in Second Life, and they progress up to the stage and get their scrolls from an avatar. And then last year actually was the first time we switched it over and put a virtual graduation screen in our graduation hall. So not only could our virtual graduands see our real graduands, but our real graduands could also see our virtual graduands. It was a really lovely mixing up of the virtual and real, and also actually for our students a really important validation of their status as students as not being marginal, but as being absolutely core to what the university is doing. So despite the fact that in our research we had a lot of people talking about, I really want to come to Edinburgh, it's symbolically important that I come and graduate on campus. I can't imagine any circumstances, said one, where I won't come to the city to graduate. We kind of saw these campus-oriented rituals, whether they were manifest by attendance on campus to graduate or by attendance in the virtual graduation, as being hugely important to students in the way in which they understood the university space. So for me, that was the kind of dominant message that came out of that research. But then we also saw students talking about other articulations of space. And I think what's important to me about the kinds of social spaces that Molineux describe isn't the way that they exclude each other, but the way in which they touch each other and they mingle and they meet. So we had students talking very much in terms of the university as a bounded space, but also talking about it in terms of a networked space. So Ali Rother was saying, yes, I felt really connected to people in my course. That was what the University of Edinburgh was to me. Quite a few students were saying, the campus of Edinburgh University, its kind of prestige, if you like, were important at the moment of enrolling for the course. But once I was on the course, for me, the university was my fellow students and my teachers and my proximity to them as a network. Yeah, other students were quite happy to be studying online to escape the Scottish weather. So we also had some articulations of the notion of fluid space among these students as well. The image you're looking at here is an image of James Lamb, who's sitting here in the audience. I'm sorry, James, if this is embarrassing. But he was at the time a research associate on this project. He was also a student on the programme. He was studying for his dissertation, and he just had a baby. So when we asked students about their study spaces, it revealed to us this notion that actually students were working across very complex, fluid spaces, which were quite elaborate interminglings of the domestic and the nomadic. For this programme, it was almost like what it meant to be a student on this programme was different for every student almost at every moment. They were all engaged on different modules within the programme, using different devices to access the programme, laptops, iPhones, iPads. They were all engaging in different kinds of learning spaces, synchronous and asynchronous, social and formal. So what it meant to be a student was shifting all the time for these students. The course was very much a fluid space for them. So we had some nice contrasting images. Many students were telling us their study spaces were here like James's. They were very domestic. They were the kitchen table, they were the bed, they were the sofa. For others, they were saying, I have been travelling around the globe while I've been studying this programme. I've been completely dependent on my devices, on my dongles, on my iPads, on my laptops. I have been making the space of the university in coffee shops, in hotel rooms, on trains, on buses. So in that sense, university space was permeating all the kind of social, the professional, the nomadic, the domestic spaces of these students in quite an interesting way. And I think each of these kinds of space has quite pragmatic implications for the way in which we think about designing for distance education. For example, if we're designing for bounded space, we want to think about how we introduce important campus-oriented rituals like graduation for distance learners. If we're designing for network space, we need to think about how we enable proximity through social media and other ways of allowing students to connect with each other and with their teachers. If we're designing for fluid space, we need to be able to make sure that our courses work for people studying it on an iPhone at a very pragmatic level. So the other kind of space, which is really interestingly articulated by Moll and Law, is this notion of fire space, which is where boundaries and connections and relations they don't move and shift as they do in fluid space, but they flicker on and off. It's like a lambent independency of presence and absence. And we also saw this being articulated by students in this study, where they were talking about the ambiguity of being a distance learner as being both present and absent at the same time. I feel a sense of belonging to the university, but at the same time I don't feel I'm actually part of the university. I'm not on campus, but I carry it with me. It's my cognitive real estate. I didn't feel that I wasn't in Edinburgh. These are all highly sort of ambiguous statements about what their relation to the university is, but the students were completely happy with it. I mean, people weren't unhappy with this ambiguity. They were carrying it with them, and it was an important part of their experience of being at the university as a distance learner. Okay, so I want to sort of shift tack a little bit now for the final part of what I want to say and talk a bit about how some of these ideas were articulated within the space of the MOOC that we've offered twice now. So the MOOC I want to talk about is the e-learning and digital cultures MOOC, which we offer in the School of Education in partnership with Coursera. It's run twice now. It's a 5-week-long MOOC, and it's a MOOC which has been designed not to be so much like conventional kind of ex-MOOC, Coursera MOOC formats, but to be a bit kind of looser. So we don't do video lectures, for example. We curate a lot of open source content for this MOOC, and we encourage student blogging, and we encourage a very visual approach. Among participants on the MOOC, we ask them to make images representing their academic knowledge rather than to complete multiple choice quizzes and so on. So it's a slightly alternative kind of MOOC design. I think because the MOOC is so social media oriented, when this MOOC first launched, I think everybody was surprised at the pure volume of social media activity that sprung up around this particular course. So what you're looking at here are the the statistics for the first run of the Digital Cultures MOOC, where we had over 40,000 enrolled users and a high level of activity. Most of these people, quite alarmingly for us, were employed in education and had postgraduate degrees, usually in education. And they were inhabiting the Facebook group and the G+ group and Twitter to a very dramatic degree. So it was a very kind of social media active course. In that sense, it was what Bonnie Stewart, a Canadian blogger, called a kind of hybrid, trying very hard to subvert its own conditions of production, by which she means we were trying to subvert the conventional XMOOC, Coursera, Udacity, edX MOOC format, which is conventionally video lecture and multiple choice question. So this was a highly visual MOOC, and the way that we kind of encouraged visuality was in two main ways. One was at the end of week 3, we asked people to submit an image, to make an image that represented something of their experience and understanding of how the MOOC had been over the previous 3 weeks. And then they put that in Flickr, and we had a competition, and 5 got a prize. And then at the end of the course, the final assessment was the creation of a digital artifact, which was then peer assessed by others on the MOOC. And I thought it would be quite nice to end just by showing you some of the images that were produced by participants on the MOOC and the ways in which those images represented and made the university space. It was quite telling that with these students, they weren't so much focused on the notion of the University of Edinburgh, they were more focused on the notion of the MOOC space and what it meant to be in a MOOC space and to represent MOOC space. So there were a couple here which show how students were working with the notion of a kind of fluidity, particularly in regard to the social media environments of the MOOC. So you can see Jan Bulls there, she's talking about drowning in a digital Niagara Falls of social media. And that was really pronounced in the first week or two of this MOOC. People were saying it's crazy, it's a waterfall, it's an ocean, I'm drowning, it's a deluge, I don't know how to cope. So we had a lot of these very kind of visual fluid images of the MOOC space. Alongside, there's one of June B's, which I think is really interesting, and there are a few people that used Alice in Wonderland metaphors to talk about the space of the MOOC, as though they were being sucked into an alternate reality by this MOOC, a space of kind of blurred ontological horizons where identities were kind of in play and no one quite knew where they stood. So we had those kind of fluid metaphors being used in the imageries. We also had network metaphors coming through quite strongly. So I like Philip Finlay-Bryan's use of Kandinsky and the kind of reaching out of laptop to laptop in sort of network mode to connect through the space of the MOOC. And then the other one you see, Pinkhead on the right, made this beautiful image of, she's imposed a social network map of one of the MOOC Twitter chats onto this fluid image of kind of underwater space, to think about how that, for me, what it says about the networked and fluid kind of spatial constructions of the MOOC space. And then we had this kind of theme that I've touched on, of mobility, of transit, kind of coming out in the images, where quite a few people looked at the MOOC in terms of transport, of location, of movement from node to node. The MOOC as a tube station, or the MOOC as a jet plane. And I think for me this was most striking in this image made by Mulu Lambreras, it's a kind of hack of the Tokyo Underground map, where they said all lines are open. I repeat, all lines are open, with this kind of panicking figure here, this kind of social media morass in which the kind of the student is located in multiple places at the same time and linked to multiple networks, and the sense of kind of of panic that was that was creating for this particular student. And then where I said that the MSc in digital education students were talking quite interestingly about bounded space, where the MOOC people talked about bounded space, it was more in the context of destruction. So there were images of the architectural kind of university spaces being bombed or being missiled or being subject to kind of invasion, came through in those images more strongly than anything else. And the final, a particularly interesting kind of spatial dimension came through early on in the MOOC. The first time it ran, one of the participants, called Chris Swift, responded to this kind of sense of chaos that people were feeling by setting up a Google Doc in which he asked people to collaborate in making a MOOC, what they called a MOOC school. So they imposed the kind of chaos of the MOOC onto an architectural sort of mapping of a conventional school space. So the quiet study room was the blogging spaces of the students. Interestingly, the teacher's room was where the main Coursera site was. The common room was the Twitter hashtag. The library was a Digo space that they'd set up, and so on. And then another participant took this into ThingLink and made a nice diagram of it. And I think this was a really useful thing for the participants to do in the first weeks of the course, to think about the crazily kind of fluid, networked kind of fire spaces of the MOOC as kind of represented by a bounded architectural space. So that was really helpful. But then I wanted to sort of temper that by showing you part of a blog post from another student, blogging as Reticulatrix, who says, I like the school, the EDC MOOC school is good, but why just this image? Why the dominant architecture? Why replicate a clean outline and unbroken lines? I want to know about the possibilities of the spaces in between, the liminal, the spaces outside, the way we can move between them. I want to let the metaphor crumble and be disrupted. I want to play in the ruins until we make a new place. I thought this was a really nice way to think about MOOC space and actually the spaces of online distance education generally in the context of the university. I'm quite fond of this image, which was created by the FemTechNet project to promote their sort of experimental MOOC, their distributed open collaborative course, which they set up last year. And they used this MOOC to kind of, this image to contrast what they're doing in the dock as a kind of highly networked space with what happens in the conventional branded ex-MOOC space, which is, in this image, heavily oriented towards monumental campus architecture. I think this was really interesting, but I think actually we could go further than this. We could think about MOOC space and online teaching space in more fluid, networked, ambiguous terms, perhaps. So to summarize, really what I'm trying to make a case for here is a case for thinking against sedentarism and thinking against our reliance on the notion of bounded space and thinking about what it means to be a university and to teach at a university, and instead to think about topological multiplicity, the multiplicity of intersecting and different kinds of spaces as they emerge through the activities of online and distance education. And I'll stop there for questions. Thanks for listening.
Tell me you've all been stunned into silence. Well, I tell you, John.
Your opening slides, the background images that you've chosen for those, perhaps are just typical scenes of Edinburgh weather, it's dark storm gathering. Is this part of what you're getting across to us?
Yes, because I think it is quite a sort of stormy kind of time, and I think partly Edinburgh looks quite good against a stormy sky, doesn't it? So does Glasgow. But I think it's a difficult time because I think we're having to work with some quite different kind of and challenging notions of what it means to teach and learn at the moment. And I think MOOCs have actually foregrounded and sort of energized a debate that's been going on for a few decades. But I think there are losses and gains in delivering online, and I think perhaps the stormy skies just illustrate that it can be difficult.
In one of the things you were talking about, the distinction between being, or how the students would perceive being at the university without being in the university, and I wondered if in any of the responses from the students anyone brought up the notion of being with the university.
Yeah, that's interesting. That didn't really come through in our data. I mean, we got the sense that students were very engaged with and invested in the university, but that notion of withness, I would say, wasn't a particularly strong part of what came out. I think partly maybe because we were asking people about the atness of being at university, about the study spaces, about that kind of relationship with the university. People didn't really talk about being with it in that sense. It was more about how they were articulating their kind of spatial relationship with the university. That's a good question.
That was really interesting, thank you. It's nice to see lots of images instead of lots and lots of bullet points. I like that. One quote that I really liked, I think it was one of the students that said, drowning in a digital Niagara Falls requires, what was it, a lifeboat of reflective quiet. Is that for staff or students or both? And how can you encourage that? Do you have any tips for that? Because I really get that point, that's a great point. So tips for that sort of reflection to help you when you feel like you're drowning and all of that?
Yes, I mean, I think in the context of the MOOC, it was particularly pronounced that because, you know, the first time that MOOC ran, it was early on in the kind of the MOOC movement, and no one really expected quite that deluge, and we didn't know that we would have to have strategies for helping people manage it. But what was really encouraging and energizing about what happened was the way in which students helped each other develop strategies for managing that kind of craziness. The EDC MOOC school that I showed at the end, that was one strategy which the participants on the MOOC kind of developed themselves and kind of created themselves as a way of just of anchoring and of creating a moment of calm and a way of making sense of that kind of morass of information. For the staff, yeah, I mean, I think we felt it as well and felt quite overwhelmed the first time the MOOC ran. So again, it was about kind of frantically trying to sort of readjust what it means to be a teacher actually for us, because when you're teaching at a ratio of one teacher to 8,000 students or whatever, you can't teach in the way that you that you've always thought about teaching before. So we had to think about how to make calm spaces to rethink what it means to be a teacher in that context. Yeah.
I know you didn't mention anything to do with this in your presentation, so feel free to just say no. But has any of your research looked at what students who go abroad for a year to study at a different university think about all of the same kind of anxieties that you've talked about?
Yeah, you're right. That the research didn't cover that, and that is one of the things that I think that we should do next. I think what I would really like to do with this research is take it into other kinds of spaces. So yes, students who are in that, those who are doing years away, students who are at different kinds of universities, you know, purely distance universities, for example, or universities in different kinds of cities. I think we could extend the reach of this research really interestingly into those kinds of domains, but we haven't done it yet.
Thank you for your lecture. And two questions, actually. One is more of a comment. First of all, do you envisage more central or more supplementary role of MOOCs in near future, observable future? And secondly, what about the supplementary forms of engagement, student engagement that occurs when a student is part of this enclosed space? How do you think these can be supplemented within the MOOCs? Is it possible at all to get students engaged in additional activities?
Do you mean MOOC students, MOOC participants?
Yes, MOOC
By
participants.
supplementary activities, what do you mean exactly?
I would say clubs and societies, you know, all of these things that make life at university social life.
Okay. All right. The first question was about whether MOOCs are going to become more central or more peripheral in practice. I think they'll become more embedded. I doubt they'll ever become central kind of core business for universities like ours, but they will be an important domain of kind of outreach and of pedagogical kind of experimentation and actually of building capacity for innovative practices which we can then use in other university spaces like on-campus classrooms. So I think they will continue to be important, but I don't think they're the end of higher education or anything. The second question, I think for me that question is different depending on whether you're thinking about MOOCs or whether you're thinking about accredited campus, based courses. So for the MSc in digital education, it's essential that we have proper support services and supplementary activities and social areas in place for those people. Those are fully signed up students of the university. So, we do provide, for example, counselling services for online distance students. We have career services for them. We have social spaces. We have things like the virtual graduation. But for MOOC participants, I don't think that we can really do that. I mean, MOOC participants aren't students in the sense that they're enrolled at the university. It's a very different relationship. So at this point, we're not really thinking about how to provide those kinds of services for MOOC students.
just going on a bit from that, a lot of these look at postgraduate courses where you've got mature students where actually it fits very well, where you're trying to fit in a course and gain another learning expertise while you're dealing with the rest of your life. With undergraduate school leavers, do you think you need to concentrate more on the campus boundaries and giving them a university experience as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think the university experience for undergraduates will always be important, but I think the kinds of lessons that we can take from looking at postgraduate students are important for undergraduate on-campus students too, in terms of particularly about the mobility of their study practices and the ways in which students are increasingly increasingly mobile because of their devices. They're increasingly connected in different ways to the university. So I think because postgraduate programs kind of foreground these issues, we can take important lessons from them and apply them to undergraduate contexts as well.
Hi, your talk and particularly your picture of your colleague with his lovely baby got me thinking about lifelong learning and the fact that in our institutions are not well set up to model lifelong learning. You know, we all come and co-locate ourselves, we sit in large lectures, that's hardly going to be a model that's going to work. So I just wondered whether you've thought about or whether you actively try and promote that idea that, that lifelong learning is actually well exemplified by the distance education and MOOC models.
Yes, I think so. I mean, certainly in the context of our accredited distance programs, that's the kind of the core cohorts are lifelong learners. And actually, we were also really surprised when we researched who was our MOOC participants. These were mostly lifelong learners, and that wasn't necessarily what we were expecting when we started with the MOOCs. We were quite surprised to find that they were all so highly qualified, and that's subsequently been shown to be quite common across all MOOC offers. That it's generally appealing to lifelong learners rather than actively widening participation and opening up higher education to new groups of users or new groups of students. So I think we perhaps need to think about what we want online distance learning to be. I think online postgraduate education is always going to be going to be targeted towards lifelong learners, but in the context of MOOCs, I think it's much more up for grabs really, and we can think about what we want that space to be. Yeah, I would agree with that, but it has to be within the context of a well-supported program, I think, to do that well. So probably a MOOC may not be the right space for it. Yeah.
There's a difference between the distance learning mode of university course and MOOC courses. As you mentioned earlier on, the student enrolled on your MSc Digital Education, the relationship between those students to the university are different between the relationship with the MOOC students and university. I think the biggest challenge of the MOOC model is a viable business model which allows the content or service provider to kind of make the provision sustainable. Without this, the current situation, universities are either use MOOCs as a way to enhance their on-campus learning like Glasgow University currently does, or use MOOC as a marketing campaign for promote brand of traditional learning. I think if we don't solve the problem of the viable business model of MOOCs, there will be a challenge to promote this mode into kind of have a really disruptive mode for the traditional learning and teaching in university. Do you have any idea of how we can solve this?
I don't have a solution to the idea of how we monetize MOOCs particularly. I think for me, the main benefits of offering MOOCs are indirect rather than direct. So for example, the point I raised earlier about actively experimenting pedagogically in MOOC space is a great way to build institutional capacity and enthusiasm for online distance education and technologically mediated ways of doing teaching across other university kind of spaces as well. So I think that's one benefit. I mean, the marketing thing is a difficult one. I think yes, MOOCs do work to market universities a bit, and we have had a few students come off the MOOC into our accredited programs. But I don't think that that's the main thing that they do. I think they can raise the profile of the university, but we can't really see them purely as a marketing device. I think for me the benefits are indirect, really, rather than directly kind of monetary.
Just a specific question about the different technologies you used for interactions between students and with students. Like, 'cause you mentioned you used Twitter, Facebook, Second Life, and another one, Daigo or something. I hadn't heard of that one.
Daigo, yeah.
So could you comment on, were there any differences between those in terms of how useful they were, how different groups of students used the different ones more? Just thinking in terms of if you were going to set up a new MOOC or distance learning program, which ones would you choose and why?
Yeah, sure. Okay, well, to take the MOOC context first, because they are, again, quite different. What happened with the MOOC was that we just built the course within the Coursera space and let enrollees know what the Twitter hashtag was for that course. Every other social media space that then kind of grew up around that course was initiated and maintained by the participants on the MOOC. So as the teachers, we didn't do anything in those social media spaces, really, apart from Twitter, and we used Google Plus to run Google Hangouts, kind of live video sessions at the end of each week. So that in a sense, that was quite a liberating moment as a teacher, because we realised, because of the scale of the MOOC, we could actually let go of social media to an extent and let that be driven by the participants, and they drove it brilliantly. On the accredited side, what we do there is we design our courses or our modules specifically to do meaningful things within different kinds of social spaces. So we've tried to link medium with message, if you like. So for example, when we're using Second Life, we use Second Life when we're covering areas of the curriculum, for example, to do with the construction of identity online. Because when you use a virtual world, you have to make an avatar, you have to make an identity for yourself. So it foregrounds identity notions, which we can then back up with readings in the literature and the scholarship around digital identity and what that means for education. So that for me, that's a complex answer to quite a complex question, but I guess to simplify, I'd say with a MOOC you can kind of let it go, and with an accredited course you need to think about designing the social media in.
My original question was about the widening participation, which you've addressed. So can I ask about something about your research? The fact that you actually give the quotes, you give the full name of the person, which is unusual in my...
Well, it's anonymised, they're not real names.
All right. I had actually wondered if it was something to do with social media and people being willing to be known. No?
Well, yeah, that's a really interesting... I mean, if we were analysing the Twitter stream, for example, it would be much harder to anonymise, but the quotes that I was showing there were interview quotes from Skype text chat interviews, so we just anonymised the names. Yeah.
Hi, I often thought that the fundamental model of a MOOC is flawed because you develop a MOOC for aimed at first-year students, and generally what happens is the people that take a MOOC generally have a degree within that area, so we sort of pitch at the wrong level, even though we understand that the people that sign up are above that. So the US have created these SPOCs, to the small personalised online course, to get people with those skills to enrol and see it through, and I believe they pay for that privilege. Is Edinburgh in any way looking at creating SPOCs and trying to target it more at the audience and charge them for it?
Not specifically, not at the moment. I mean, I think there are various ways of dealing with that issue of how you design the level of the MOOC for an unknowable and unknowably huge kind of mass of people. And I think one approach is actually to create pathways through individual MOOCs so that you can engage with the materials at a relatively low level, or you can, if you're a postgraduate working within education, for example, you can engage at a much higher, more intense and kind of level. So I think you can do that within the constraints of MOOC design. It's a challenge within a 5-week course, but because it's so huge, and because study groups will grow up driven by participants, you can do that. You can build that in, so you can make a Spock within a MOOC if you like. But it's a good question. Thanks.
Okay, so now I'm going to abuse chair's privilege and have the last question. Okay. I want to take you right back to the beginning of your presentation when you talked about the way that universities project themselves to the outside world, and Glasgow does exactly the same thing as Edinburgh. So in our literature there are lots of pictures of this building and various other buildings and physical space. What you presented today challenges that very much, and I guess that some of the quotes, possibly some of the imagery, might provide a route into universities changing that external persona. But have you given any thought as to how you would even begin to do that?
Yeah, I have actually. I've thought about that quite a bit, because my original take on this was that we need to stop using images of the campus and the real estate, if you like, because that was othering distant students in a way which was not helpful. But actually, from doing this research, I've come around to the idea that it's actually quite a good idea to use images of the campus and the university space, not in that kind of othering move, but because it means something emotionally and symbolically to distant students that there is a campus, even though they will never come here. So, I mean, I think, we could overdo it. I think we need to think, and I know colleagues in communication and marketing do think very carefully about the imagery that they use. But I'm not really arguing that we should be abandoning, beautiful images of campus space in our promotional materials. The converse, if anything.
Well, I'm sure you'll agree that's been a very thought-provoking presentation, and we had some very good questions from the audience. Let's thank Sian once again for an excellent presentation.
Thanks.